Hey guys, my name is Ryan, and we're back again with another Spirit Island video. Last month I began a series covering each of the adversaries and focusing on how to play against them and how to advance to the highest difficulty for each one. It was called the Aces series because for each of these adversaries I picked one spirit who was particularly strong in that matchup. I named him as an ace and suggested if you needed to get your first victory against this spirit, you could play this guy. They are quite strong. Now, the process of going through and analyzing each of the adversaries individually was a very fun experience for me. So often we just focus on what the spirits are doing, and we're not paying so close attention to what the adversaries are doing. Which makes sense because we control the spirits. We have to make all kinds of decisions about which growth option to use, how to grow on which track, which cards to play, so on and so forth. And it can be so easy to be focused so much on ourselves that we lose track of what our opponents are doing. And so being able to really focus, what are the adversaries doing? How do they actually work? I feel like it has made me much more insightful and better at the game. I think going through that process yourself is actually going to be very rewarding, and it's something that will level up your game with every spirit against that adversary. But I wanted to do a little bit of reflection in this video and just talk about the adversaries as a whole, and then end with my tier list for which ones I think are the greatest, the most fun to play against. So starting off, we're going to do just a little bit of core information. As we can see here, we have the 8 adversaries organized by when they were released. So in the base game, we got 3 adversaries. We got Sweden, Prussia, and England. In Branch and Claw, we got France. Jagged Earth gave us Russia and Habsburg Livestock Colony. Originally released as Promo Pack 2, but now it can be purchased in Feather and Flame, is Scotland. And then most recently in Nature Incarnate, we got Habsburg Mining Expedition. It is kind of interesting how Jagged Earth came with 2 adversaries, and then the Promo Pack 2 was an extension of Jagged Earth, so it was kind of 3 adversaries bundled together. And then the base game had Branch and Claw kind of originally bundled with it, or at least designed simultaneously. And so that came as a package of 4. And so from that perspective, it's only quite recently that we've gotten a new adversary, and it's just a one single adversary. So I hope this is not indicative of like slower momentum, but it is important to recognize that there's only so much design space for the adversaries to exist in at all. I mean, the base game accentuates the only 3 things that the adversaries do. They explore, they build, and then they ravage. Prussia just has a wild invader deck, which is basically modified explore. So this is our explore guy. England's the build guy, and Sweden's the ravage guy. So that kind of knocks out all 3 of those. With Branch and Claw, we got the addition of tokens, and we have 3 adversaries already that accentuate different tokens. So we got the Strife, we got the Beast, and then we got the Disease. And the only 2 other core tokens that don't have an adversary that explicitly interact with them would be Wilds, which I'm sure would be very hard to do. Maybe it could work something like a Disease, but I don't know what situation you'd want to let things explore and save a Wild token. That would be a whole design challenge. And then Badlands, which strictly hurts the invaders. I guess it does hurt the Dahan. Maybe the Dahan expansion could do something there, but overall, the token design space for adversaries is starting to get restricted. There is Blight, and we've got 3 adversaries now that care quite a bit about Blight, so that's already been milked out pretty nicely. And then Scotland cares about the coast quite a bit. Maybe we get something that accentuates the inlands, but I trust the designers that they'll be able to come up with something great. Having each adversary be so wildly unique is a great blessing in this game. I mean, I'm not even sure which 2 adversaries you would say is the most similar, because they really do have their own unique flavor and playstyle for all of them. There are a few objective ways that we can organize all of these invaders. Starting simply first with the difficulty at level 6 is pretty straightforward, where we've got 2 adversaries at difficulty 11, 5 of them at difficulty 10, no one taps out at 9, and then only Sweden tops out at 8. I mean, if you've been following my videos, you know my feelings that difficulty really doesn't matter, since every single spirit interacts with every single adversary a little bit differently. And so for some spirits, a matchup that's listed as a 5 could feel more like an 8, whereas others could feel like a 2. Strictly going by the number listed on the adversary is not going to give you an accurate representation of how the adversary actually is and how it actually feels. There's many, many more factors that go into it. Another way that we could organize these guys is by how many fear cards are in the deck. So we've got Prussia has the fewest with 12 cards in the deck. And then from there, we have England, Sweden, and Habsburg Mining Expedition all get 13. Then we got 14 for these 3 guys. And then Scotland here at 16. There is no adversary that caps out at 15 invader cards. Now, the amount of fear cards is generally a good metric, but it is important to note that because of the extra fear per card for England 6, it actually has slightly more fear than Scotland. So this would be a more accurate representation of the amount of fear for each adversary. But if we were to step back for 1 second and instead look at the number of cards, I do find a very interesting thing is that you've got your base game here, and then if we rearrange this, next in order of release, we had Branching Claw here, and then we had Jagged Earth here, and then Promo Pack 2 here. So there is a clear progression towards having more and more fear cards as each expansion has been released, as each adversary has been released. The pattern has been unbroken up until we get to Nature Incarnate, going back around to 13. So an interesting pattern to exist in the first place, then an interesting break from the pattern as well. Another way that you could organize the invaders is by how strong their board is on turn 0, as measured by the amount of attack damage. So because Prussia starts with an additional town on the board, they get +2 on the attack. And that's actually the smallest amount, tied with Russia, since Russian explorers do 2 damage. But because the explorer is an explorer and not a town, it's going to be easier to handle. So we could give it like a half point. But they both add 2 damage to the board to start the game. Then Scotland comes in next with just a city being added for +3 damage. And then we have France and Habsburg Livestock Colony. Both of them start with 2 additional towns. Though in this situation, because of the durability and the potential for bonus damage because of +2 adjacencies, we could give France like a half a point disadvantage there. So slightly easier, though they do both just add 2 towns. Next would be England, which adds a town and a city. Then Habsburg Mining Expedition adds 4 explorers and a city. And then Sweden, particularly if we're going to include the bonus town because of Sweden 4, the setup change, after we do the initial explore, it would start with 2 additional towns and a city, and all of that does bonus damage as well, for a total of +11 damage on the starting board. Easily the most by a dramatic margin. What I find funny here is that this does not very well correlate to how threatening the invaders are on turn 1. I mean, obviously, like 2 of the most threatening invaders on turn 1 are right here and right here, but I mean, Prussia's all the way up here, and we know that they are crazy aggressive to start the game. And England right here, they're quite peaceful to start the game, and yet they're the 3rd strongest starting board, so that's not the best form of analysis, but I do find it an interesting thing as a mechanism to compare adversaries. So if I were to organize these adversaries by how quickly they can kill you, it might look a little bit something like this, with the fastest killers here at the bottom, the slowest killers here at the top. Probably like so. Maybe switch around Russia and Scotland. But certainly Scotland could go either in the middle tier or in the slowest tier, depending. Really, I guess it depends on the explorers. They're way more deadly on the coast than the inland. This has quite a bit of variance to it. But Russia, because they start so generic and they really don't put pressure on until like turn 3 or 4, they definitely are a slower killer, similar to England. It's once you get into that stage 2, after a full 3 stage 1 cards, that they really start to ramp up. But our fastest killers are here at the bottom. Let's zoom in for a second. Fastest killers are here at the bottom with Prussia, Sweden, HME especially is able to ravage on turn 1. Very, very fast attacker. Now, the corollary to this is how durable the adversaries are. You would expect there's an inverse relationship between durability and aggression. And for the most part, we can kind of just leave this here in place. Maybe we can push Scotland up just a little bit. And this is largely a representation of how durable they are. Where, these guys here, once you get ahead of them, they kind of just fall over and die. Sweden, you can completely ignore the escalation. And if you stop the Blight, it disables the only 2 ways that they can get ahead and fight back on the board. Prussia is completely generic. HME does have a couple tricks. They have their mining boom as well as assault card. So for that reason, actually, I think I'm going to bump them up a little bit. But this feels like a pretty accurate representation of durability, both that long game, how effective do they do. Russia, even though they start so slow, they're durable because you can't get rid of those freaking explorers, and there's just way too many of them. And I should also mention the HLC 5 reminder card, which randomly halfway through the game just spits out 4 more buildings on the board, and then you have to find a way to win back the board, kind of like playing 2 games in a row. You play a setup, you whittle it down, the game resets, and then you have to play it all down again. It's a very hokey form of resilience, but it's there. I can definitely see the way that same concept was improved upon with HME and the Salt card. So definitely by all these different metrics, all of the adversaries are very unique to each other, which is, I think, very fun and interesting. And that makes the game much more replayable, because once you've played a certain spirit into a certain matchup a whole bunch, you might get used to a certain play pattern. But if you go from like a high-speed, low-resilience adversary to a low-speed, high-resilience adversary, your game plan has to completely change. And that's really fun and exciting, and that's one of the big things that makes Spirit Island just so replayable. I think it is high time now. I'm just going to get straight to my tier list. So instead of going in any particular order, I'm going to roll this D8 here, and whatever pops up is the one that we're going to reveal and talk about. So first things first, we got a 3. So my third favorite adversary to play against is the Kingdom of France. It's a solid mid-speed adversary. It puts a lot of pressure on you in the early game, forcing you to handle the initial setup. I believe you start with 3 towns on the board and only 4 in the pool, and you are probably going to build 2 towns on the first turn, so that second turn of the game, that second build, you're all of a sudden going to be staring down a loss condition. And so having that early engagement is great. We can't just sit around and do absolutely nothing for the first couple turns. The Slaves Rebellion card, I think, is a really fun mini game. We can get some really sweet high points where we're able to get tons of extra value from it. And then sometimes, it's just a free town kill, which is, good and fine. Slaves Rebellion, when we do kind of nothing to set it up, is a solidly decent card. Nothing that's going to break the game. The only downside about this, I would definitely say, is Slaves Rebellion 2, where if you don't win the game at that Slaves Rebellion 2, you're going to get so much pressure put on you by these Stage 3 cards that you're probably just going to lose. So there is this moment in the game where you have to just absolutely win, or else the game is probably lost, even from a generally winning position. And so having that expiration date can be a little frustrating if you miss it by the slimmest of margins. But otherwise, great adversary, very engaging from start to finish. Next, we got number 7. All right, going way down to an unpopular, unfavorite one. We're going to get the Kingdom of Sweden. So Sweden is an extremely aggressive adversary. But my big problem with this guy is that it just doesn't have any fight. It doesn't have that dog in him, you know what I'm saying? If he starts to get beat, he has no way of coming back. And, I want to have a fight that, feels like we're going back and forth and it's a real slugfest. With Sweden, it's like you get 1 or 2 good punches in on the guy and he just throws in the towel by turn 3 and he's like, screw this, I can't do it, it's no fun. And then it just feels like abuse. Next, we got number 1. All right. Well, if not having any dog in the fight is any indication of things I dislike, thing I really like is when you have that good, honest back and forth, brawl it out. You know, you have a very competent adversary, but at the same time, it fights fair. And I think that describes Scotland beautifully. With all those inland extra towns, you know, we have a reason to scale up and get really big, but we can't get too greedy with it because it is the coast that actually kills us. So it feels fair, but at the same time, you know, every punch comes with a counter punch. You know, we have a little bit of extra information, so we can be planning around the coastal card and we can be really clever. But Scotland, on the other hand, can punish us for overcompensating for the coast by just getting so huge it becomes unbearable on the inland. And I find that to be really fun and exciting. You know, Scotland doesn't just roll over and die on turn 2. No, he fights back and he makes for fun, long, and exhilarating games. Next, don't roll off the board. We got number 2. Okay, well, if I like the dogfight against Scotland, then it should come at no surprise that my number 2, and not by a very big margin, would be the Kingdom of England. England is another one, a brawler. You know, at every single point of the game, it is putting up more and more and more buildings. We just need to keep punching. We just need to keep hitting. No matter how many times we hit them, they're going to keep coming back. You know, they're like the unkillable zombie. And that means that, you know, we at every stage of the game, it's going to be engaging. You know, we don't get free turns very often. So, I mean, I like that, right? When I play a game, I want to play a game. I don't want to realize that I can just skip my turn and, you know, everything will be hunky-dory. And England guarantees that. Okay, now we might have to start doing some re-rolling. Number 8. Okay, we're just ignoring the middle. Well, my least favorite adversary of all is going to be the Tsardom of Russia. I like brawling. I like fighting. I like how against Scotland and England and France, you have to keep on punching, keep on hitting. At every single point, you're getting scrappy and you're just going for it. And Russia punishes that gameplay. You know, if you get too far ahead on the board and you're able to successfully stop the blight because you're winning, then they just arbitrarily add more stuff to the board. And that feels really frustrating. You know, you start producing a good amount of fear and then they just hit you with these fear bombs. And so it forces you to play this much more controlled, restrained play style. You know, and that's not me. I don't want to play controlled. I don't want to play restrained. I want to just go for it, have the chaos. You know, you can do that against Russia, but you can't have any like middle ground. You have to go extremely aggressive or extremely restrained. Having that middle ground is where you're going to lose. And that's pretty frustrating because that's actually the kind of the speed of the game that I find the most exciting. Next, we got number, not 7, not 3. Last chance before I just give up on this thing. We got number 5. Whoopah! All right, my number 5. This adversary definitely puts up a fight, but at the same time, it can be a bit self-defeating, and it's a lot of RNG with the way that plays out. And I'm talking about Habsburg Livestock Colony. With the way that it can put up 7 damage starting from nothing is, you know, quite threatening. You know, being very durable, being able to fight back is very cool. But the way that it is resilient is kind of frustrating. Just getting 4 buildings added to the board just out of nowhere is, you know, it feels like there's just no counterplay to it. Because, I mean, well, there isn't. There is no counterplay. And just getting these loss conditions just by the flip of a event card is also pretty frustrating. But outside of those situations, Habsburg is pretty fun. The mini game of trying to figure out which towns to move to maximize future potential is a pretty interesting one. At some points, though, you can just create these random pockets. One that comes up semi-regularly is on board F. I believe if you go wetlands into mountains, you can just deny one of the turn 2 explorers because it just pockets itself. Very strange dynamic. I don't dislike the adversary necessarily. It can lead to a lot of fun and interesting games, but it also creates a lot of frustrating situations that there's just no counterplay for. It just kind of happens by the flip of the top of the deck, and there's nothing you can do. Okay, last we have 4 or 6. If we get a high number, we're going 4. If we get a low number, we're going 6. And we get 2, so we're going to go to number 4. All right, my number 4 most favorite adversary. This one, they come out swinging really hard, so we have to as well. There is a stabilizing moment in the game. I feel like it's very similar to Habsburg Livestock Colony, but just improved. And of course, we're talking about Habsburg 2.0, Habsburg Mining Expedition. They come out swinging on turn 1, but, if we're pretty clever, we can take their aggression and flip it against themselves, creating very unique, distinct playstyles, very one-of-a-kind play patterns. I think that's really fun and interesting. There's no adversary that plays like it, and that the way that you have to think here is it's just not replicable. I feel like there's no other adversary where you'd want to actively kill explorers over towns because it could disable a ravage. Something like that kind of thinking, turning off mining lands, makes HME just a fascinating, interesting adversary. I'm loving this guy. That, of course, leaves number 6 for Kingdom of Brandenburg, Prussia, the generic guys. And I understand that if you're just playing the generic guys, they'd probably wind up at the bottom of a lot of people's lists. So, I totally get that, right? They kind of have no frills, but it's just the core Spirit Island, but you just hit the fast forward button. And I like that. Me and my buddies, we usually have our last game of the day always against Brandenburg, Prussia. We find ourselves with like 20, 30 minutes left before someone's got to go for a meeting or, their wife's expecting them home. And, just throw down some spirits, play some BP, and you just kind of just have a blitz game. So very fun. I play a ton of Prussia. Like I said, they show up in pretty much every play session with my friends. We're all just trying to squeeze out one last rep before we all got to go. And so maybe I just kind of have put him a couple spots higher than some would. It's hard to say that when he's so close to the bottom. But, the reason why I don't like him is just because it is so aggressive and lacks so much resilience. The game feels solved by turn 3. If you're in a decent position by turn 3, you're probably doing just fine. You just don't get the ability to scale up and get huge and have that big godlike experience. The game plays out so fast that, right when you feel like you're starting to get, your feet moving and your wheels turning, the game's already over. So anyways, this is my tier list. So here's that same final tier list, just broken up into 4 different categories, 4 different layers. And when you look at the adversaries broken up in this way, I feel like it's very revealing to the type of play style and the type of game that I like to have. If you take a look at the top, we have both Scotland and England, and both of these guys create long games. They give you plenty of time to grow and to expand, to get into the majors, and to really just reach the full potential of your spirit because you have so much more time to build up. We're playing as spirits of the island. Those are kind of like gods, and we get to reach that godlike mode at the end of the game when playing against these guys, and the payoff is very satisfying. Coming down to this next tier, we have France and the 2 Habsburg adversaries, and these are basically the middle speed adversaries. They tend to go to turns like 7, sometimes 8. They have, pretty threatening mid-game, very, very swingy at certain points. And I think with these, they are a little bit faster than what we have for Scotland and England, but as we'll see, they are also slower than what we're going to have down here. And so you don't get to reach that massive endgame state, but you do get to get a good brawl at every stage along the game, and you can feel like, at all points, if you're not on your game and you're not fighting, you could just lose. And so it really feels like a good back and forth. We make some moves, we gain some advantages, and then they have some big swingy plays happen, and they come back, and it feels much more dynamic, much more poetic. And so I think the overall experience of these guys is quite enjoyable. Now we go down to this next tier down here, and we have the 2 fastest adversaries in the game, Prussia and Sweden. And I find with these adversaries, the game's over by turn 3 or turn 4. while the game might not be actually over, the game is largely decided by that point. You've either gotten a stranglehold on the game and you're starting to get ahead, and these guys have really no resilience, no way to come back, or the opposite. They got those back-to-backs and really punished you, and, you just kind of get blown out and there's not much more game to be had. I feel like you spend so much time in the spirit phase of turn 1 against both of these guys that, I don't know, it doesn't have the same kind of play pattern that I find to be enjoyable. I like getting to that big endgame state, and I'm pretty sure Prussia will deck you out on turn 7, I think is when it decks you out. And so you don't even have the chance to get to your full endgame potential. You literally don't have enough time against Prussia. Now, last is Russia, and this one is one I really don't like. I always avoid Russia if I'm given the choice, but Russia just punishes you for having fun. If you got too much control over the game, okay, we're going to hit you with that Russia 6, and now we're going to get more dangerous. Like, okay. Well, if you start to get ahead a little bit and you start to produce too much fear, okay, we're going to punish you for that too. And so the way to play is to sit around, just kind of dirtle, remove blight, scale up, but not actually progress. It's such a bizarre play pattern. I don't like it. And it just feels like I'm punished for doing things that I find to be fun. And so we're probably not going to see too much Russia content from me. It's really just antithetical to what makes me happy in this game. Now, I want to be clear that while I hate Russia, I know some people that absolutely love this adversary, and the same is true for all of these. My opinions are different than so many other people's, and this is what makes Spirit Island great. There's so much focus on the spirits and what spirits you enjoy and what spirits make you happy, but there's two sides to the game. You have the spirits and you have the adversaries, and the adversaries are just as important as the spirits in order to determine what is or is not fun for you. What I enjoy, you might not enjoy, and that's what makes this game great. We can both enjoy it, even if in different ways. Well, that's going to be it for me today, guys. Normally this is where I would say I'm going to keep it short and not keep it too long, but we're already half an hour into this thing. I just love the sound of my voice way too much. I would love to hear what your favorite adversaries are. What's your adversary tier list? What kind of adversaries would you like to see me play more against? Whether it's because you just love the play pattern and you love the games it produces, or maybe it's just a big challenge that you're trying to get over. Thank you guys so much for watching. Have yourselves a glorious day.